I stood in the empty house where I had once raised my children, the place that had once been filled with so much laughter, so much love. The echoes of their voices still lingered in the corners, like distant memories I could almost reach out and touch. How many birthday parties had we celebrated here? How many sleepless nights did I spend comforting a crying child or running after one who just learned to walk? It felt like only yesterday that the walls of this house had been filled with the sounds of family, the clinking of dinner plates at the table, the murmur of my children's voices, the joyful chaos that comes with raising a family. Now, all that was left was an overwhelming silence. A silence that seemed to stretch on forever. It was the kind of silence that made you feel like you were the only person left in the world, and the walls, once full of life, now stood like cold sentinels. The echo of my footsteps was the only sound that accompanied me through the hallways. I walked through room after room, each one a silent witness to the past. Each room held its own story. The living room where we spent so many evenings as a family, the kitchen where I made countless meals, the bedrooms where my children had grown up. Each room now felt like a museum of a life I no longer recognized. It was like a piece of my soul was trapped here, surrounded by memories, yet feeling more distant with every passing day. 3 months. It had been 3 months since any of my children had reached out to me, not on my birthday, not on Thanksgiving, and not even a simple text. I sat down at the kitchen table, my hands resting on the wood, my fingers tracing the grooves that had once been smoothed out by years of use. How many dinners had we shared here? How many heart-to-heart talks had we had over cups of tea or the occasional glass of wine? The silence seemed to mock me. It was almost as if the walls themselves were asking, "What happened? Where did they go?" The emptiness in this house mirrored the emptiness in my heart, the same loneliness that seemed to grow with each passing day. It wasn't just the house that felt abandoned, it was me. I had spent years loving them, caring for them, giving them everything I could, and yet in the end I was left here, alone. How did it happen? What went wrong? I asked myself this question every day, and the answer was clear, though it hurt to admit it. They had disappeared because I had stopped giving them what they wanted. I had stopped supporting them financially. The moment I refused to give them money, the moment I stopped being the ATM they could count on, that was the moment I became invisible to them. That was the moment they stopped calling. And now, here I was, in this cold, empty house, with nothing but my thoughts to keep me company. The truth was, I was angry at them, angry at myself. But what hurt the most was knowing why they had disappeared. It wasn't because I had stopped loving them, or because I had become too old, too frail to care for them. It was because I had stopped supporting them financially. I had stopped being their safety net, their backup plan. I had always been there for them, even when I had nothing left to give. I had worked hard for everything we had. Richard and I both had. We had sacrificed so much to provide for them, to give them the lives we never had growing up. But now, they had turned their backs on me the moment I said no. I'm Barbara, 68 years old, and I'm sitting here in a place where my children will never find me. And honestly, that's exactly how I want it. I've spent my whole life being a mother, a wife, a caregiver. But now, I need to be something else. I need to be me. And that means walking away from the people I thought I would be surrounded by in my later years. I spent my whole life thinking that love and family were enough to keep us close. But sometimes, it isn't. Sometimes, it takes more than just love. It takes respect. It takes boundaries. It takes knowing when to say enough. Before I tell you what I did with the house they fought so bitterly over, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? I'd love to know. I want to hear from other women who have experienced something similar. From those who have poured their hearts and souls into their families only to be left behind when they stopped being useful. You know what it's like. The moment you stop giving, the moment you stop being the provider, the moment you stop being the one who is always there, that's the moment everything changes. That's when they start looking at you differently. They stop seeing you as their mother and start seeing you as a tool, as a resource. And I want to hear from you. I want to hear your stories, your experiences, because I know I'm not alone in this. My journey began 5 years ago, when my husband, Richard, passed away. It feels like it happened yesterday, but it was 5 years ago. It's strange how time moves so quickly, yet it feels like the wound hasn't healed at all. Richard and I had been married for 43 years. 43 years of hard work, love, and raising our children. He was a good man, a hard-working man who provided for our family, who did everything in his power to ensure that we had what we needed. When he passed, I thought I would be fine. I thought I had everything I needed to live out the rest of my days comfortably. He left me with a paid-off house worth $800,000, his life insurance and his pension, and on top of that, my Social Security checks. I was set. I thought I was. I thought that the rest of my life would be filled with peace. I thought I would grow old, surrounded by my children and my grandchildren, enjoying the quiet moments of my later years. But as soon as Richard was gone, everything began to change. Slowly, at first. At first, my children seemed to be there for me. Daniel, my eldest, suggested I downsize the house. He said it would be too much for me to handle on my own. Jennifer, my middle child, offered to take over my finances. She said it was too complicated for me to manage. Michael, my youngest, moved his family closer, saying he wanted to look after me, and at the time I thought it was just them being thoughtful. But looking back now, I see it differently. They weren't just offering help, they were taking control. I have 3 children, Daniel, who is 45, Jennifer, who is 42, and Michael, the youngest, at 39. Together, they have 7 children, 7 grandchildren who I used to adore, who used to come running to me for hugs and kisses, but now they're just faces in pictures. I thought I had been a good mother. I believed that after everything Richard and I had done for them, they would be there for me. We worked hard to put all 3 of them through college, helped with their down payments for their homes, and supported them through every phase of their lives. We gave them everything we had. We thought that was enough. But after Richard died, everything changed. I look back on it now, and I realize how foolish I was. How naive. I thought that my children would always be there, that they would always love me the same way they did when they were little. But as they grew older, as they became adults, I became less important, less needed, and now I'm sitting here, in this empty house, with nothing but my thoughts and the realization that I have nothing left but the memories. At first, their actions seemed helpful, even thoughtful. I remember the first time Daniel suggested that I downsize. He said, "Mom, this house is just too much for you to manage on your own. You're getting older, and it's hard for anyone to take care of such a big place by themselves. Maybe it's time to think about something smaller, more manageable." I agreed, at least on the surface. It made sense, didn't it? The house had always been a lot to keep up with. The rooms were large, the yard was sprawling, and after Richard passed, there was no longer anyone to help with the maintenance. It felt like too much. But looking back now, I see that it was just the beginning. A small seed planted to begin the subtle manipulation of my independence. At the time, I was grieving, lost without Richard, and so incredibly lonely. I welcomed their concern, their suggestions. After all, my children were just trying to help, weren't they? They loved me. Or at least I thought they did. Their involvement gave me some comfort, some sense that life would continue as it always had. But what I didn't realize then was that it was all part of a larger plan, one that I didn't see until it was nearly too late. Jennifer took a different approach. She came to me one afternoon, sat down beside me at the kitchen table and said, "Mom, don't worry about the numbers. They're complicated, and I'll take care of your finances from now on. You've worked hard enough your whole life. Let me handle it. It'll take the burden off you, and you won't have to think about all these details." Her tone was soothing, like a balm, and I was too exhausted, too emotionally drained to protest. So I agreed, thinking that it would be a relief. Jennifer, after all, had always been the more responsible one, the one with a sharp mind and organizational skills. I trusted her, but it wasn't just about managing my finances. It was about control. Slowly, little by little, I found myself relinquishing more and more of my decisions to her, thinking it was in my best interest. I couldn't see how easily I was being maneuvered, how they were slowly pulling the strings while I was simply floating along, lost in my grief. And then there was Michael, the youngest, the one I always thought of as the baby, even though he was nearly 40. He came to me one day, eyes wide with concern, explaining how his car was on its last legs and that he needed it fixed to get to work. "Mom, I need you to help me out with this one. If I don't get this fixed, I won't be able to drive to my job, and you know I need to support my family," he said. The words hit me hard. He needed me. Of course I agreed. What kind of mother would I be if I turned him away? I couldn't bear the thought of him struggling. I had always been there for my children, always stepped in when they needed me. But that was the start. One favor, one request, and then it was as if they had opened the floodgates. Daniel came to me again, this time with a more pressing problem. His business, he explained, was struggling. The economy had taken a downturn and things weren't looking good. He needed help with his mortgage for a few months until he could get things back on track. I didn't think twice. I knew how hard he worked, how much he had sacrificed to get his business off the ground. So I agreed. A loan. It seemed harmless enough. Just a few months. Surely I could help my son in his time of need. But then it wasn't just the mortgage. It was Jennifer again, needing money for her daughter's braces. "Mom, it's really urgent," she said. "The dentist is saying that if we don't get them on now, it'll affect her bite later on. I've already arranged everything with the orthodontist. I just need you to help with the upfront costs." What could I say? She was my daughter. Of course, I helped. And it didn't stop there. Michael came to me next, asking if I could help with some renovations he was doing in his basement. "Mom, it's not just a want, it's a need. I need a space where I can work from home, and it'll be much cheaper in the long run. You know how hard it is to keep up with everything, and the kids need a place to play too." How could I say no? I could feel the guilt rising in my chest. They needed me, and as a mother, it was my duty to help them. I had to do what I could to make their lives easier, didn't I? These were the thoughts that swirled in my head as the requests began to pile up. They weren't just occasional favors anymore. No, these were constant demands. Each one felt urgent. Each one seemed like it had to be taken care of right away. They all had their reasons. Business struggling, medical emergencies, family needs, and each time I said yes, each time I handed over the money, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was being a good mother, the mother they needed. I didn't realize that I was becoming a doormat, a walking ATM that they could simply tap into whenever they wanted. It felt endless, one thing after another. Jennifer needed money for her kids' private school tuition. Daniel's business was still in trouble and needed another cash infusion. Michael wanted more renovations, now claiming that the basement space needed to be upgraded again. It felt like there was no end to it. Every time I turned around, there was another request, another plea for help. And I kept giving. I kept saying yes. Because what kind of mother would I be if I didn't? How could I look them in the eye and say no when they needed me? How could I turn my back on them when they were in such dire need? But with each favor, with each loan, with each request, I began to feel like I was losing something, not just money, though that was part of it. I was losing myself. I had spent so many years giving, giving, giving. At first, it felt like love, a bond that only a mother could understand. But over time, it started to feel like obligation, like duty rather than love. The more I gave, the less I had for myself. The more I sacrificed, the emptier I felt. And yet, I couldn't stop. I thought I was doing what was best. I thought that if I gave them everything they needed, they would love me more, appreciate me more. But the truth was, I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I was doing it to fill the emptiness inside of me, and instead of finding fulfillment, I was left drained, exhausted, and resentful, but I didn't know how to stop, because stopping meant cutting off the only form of connection I had left to my children. It meant admitting that I couldn't continue giving, that I had nothing left to offer, and that thought, that realization, terrified me. Over the course of 4 years, I calculated how much I had given them, nearly $300,000. $300,000. That's the money Richard and I had worked our entire lives to save, to build a future, to ensure that we'd be secure in our later years. It was supposed to be our cushion, our safety net, the reward for decades of hard work and sacrifice. But here I was, giving it away, piece by piece, to children who barely seemed to appreciate what it had cost me. It was as if they thought the money came from nowhere, that it was endless, that it had no value, no significance. They had no idea the effort it took to accumulate that wealth. They had no idea what Richard and I had sacrificed for it, what it took to put them through college, to buy their first cars, to help them start their own families. All of that hard work, all those years of toiling in silence, had been reduced to a simple transaction. But it wasn't just the money that hurt. What truly stung was how little it seemed to matter to them. They didn't seem to care about the sacrifices I was making, about the toll it was taking on me. They didn't even express any gratitude. It wasn't about appreciation or love. It had become something else entirely. They didn't even ask anymore. They just told me what they needed and I gave it to them. Jennifer would text me, as casually as if she were asking for a recipe or a favor, telling me that she had already enrolled her kids in summer camp and needed $4,500 by Friday. There was no please or thank you, just a simple matter-of-fact statement of need, as if she knew without question that I would say yes. Daniel, too, had a way of reminding me over and over again that his mortgage payment was coming due. Each time he seemed to expect that I would write the check without hesitation. He never asked. He just reminded me as though it were my responsibility, as if I had no choice but to give. Michael wasn't any different. He would tell me exactly how much I owed him for car repairs, as if he had already decided that I was the one who would take care of it. There was no bargaining, no conversation, just a straightforward demand. It wasn't about need anymore. It wasn't even about family. It was about expectation. It wasn't just the money that bothered me. It was the way they acted as though it was my duty, my obligation, to keep giving. They didn't just rely on me. They demanded it. They saw me as a wellspring of support, one that never dried up, one that they could tap into whenever they needed something, without question. I became their backup plan, their safety net, their personal ATM, and I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to stop. Every time I thought about putting my foot down, every time I thought about drawing a line in the sand, a little voice inside me, one I had silenced for years, would whisper that I was being selfish. I couldn't help but think that I should be doing this, that this was my job as a mother, that this was what I was meant to do. I had spent my entire life giving to them. Could I really stop now? But as the years went on, it wore me down, and I began to lose sight of who I was in the process. I had been Barbara, a loving mother, a devoted wife, the one everyone turned to when they needed help. But now, I was just the one with the checkbook. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a resource, a bank account, a tool to be used until it ran dry. I remember one night, lying awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The house was too quiet, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I had become accustomed to the noise of my children's demands, the constant phone calls, the texts, the reminders. Without them, the silence felt unbearable. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about everything I had given up, everything I had sacrificed. The tears wouldn't come, not anymore. I had cried so many times that I had run out of tears, but I couldn't shake the dread that had settled deep inside of me. Finally, I got up and went to the kitchen. I didn't want to, but I had to face the reality of my situation. I sat down at the table, opened the drawer where I kept my financial papers, and started to go over the numbers. The cold, hard truth was staring me in the face, and I couldn't escape it any longer. My financial advisor, Thomas, had warned me that I was spending too quickly. He had cautioned me time and again that if I wasn't careful, I would run out of money faster than I could imagine. But I hadn't wanted to believe it. I had ignored the warning signs. I had convinced myself that it would all work out, that somehow I would figure it out in time. His projections were sobering.
There's something I need to tell you.
At the rate I was going, I would run out of money in just 6 years.
But you deserve to know.
By the time I was 74, I would be broke, with nothing left to live on. The numbers didn't lie. They were staring back at me, cold and unforgiving. And in that moment, everything changed. The truth hit me like a slap in the face. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep giving. I couldn't keep sacrificing my future for the sake of their present. But it wasn't just the money that bothered me. It was the realization that they didn't see it. They didn't see the toll it was taking on me. They thought I had endless resources that I could just keep giving, that I could always be there to bail them out when they needed it. They thought I had an infinite well of support, an endless supply of funds. But the truth was, I was running on empty. I had nothing left to give, nothing left to hold on to, and they didn't understand. They didn't care. To them, I was just a safety net, there to catch them when they fell, but never really someone they needed to care for in return. At that moment, I knew something had to change. I couldn't go on like this. I couldn't keep living in this cycle of giving, of constantly being taken from without ever receiving anything in return. I needed to protect myself. I needed to stop being their fallback, their last resort. I had spent my whole life doing everything for them, but now it was time for me to do something for myself. I needed to start thinking about my future, about what was left for me, and not just what I could give to them. I had to stop. I had to say no. But the question was, could I? It took me 3 months to gather the courage to do what I knew I had to do. 3 long, agonizing months of sleepless nights, tossing and turning, my mind racing with thoughts of how this moment would unfold. The constant fear gnawed at me. What would happen when I said no? What would they say? Would they be angry? Would they resent me? Would they even understand? Each time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, expecting, demanding, and I felt the crushing weight of guilt settle deeper into my chest. The guilt, like a heavy stone, pressed down on me, reminding me of all the years I had spent giving everything I had to my children. It was as if my entire identity had been wrapped up in being the one who always gave. But now I knew I couldn't keep living this way. I couldn't continue sacrificing my own future for the sake of their present. I practiced in front of the mirror, trying to find the right words, trying to prepare myself for the confrontation that was coming. The speech I had written on index cards was rehearsed over and over again, each word carefully chosen, each sentence carefully structured. I wanted to sound firm yet compassionate. I wanted to make them understand that this wasn't about me being selfish. It was about my survival, my future. But no matter how many times I rehearsed, no matter how much I tried to calm my racing heart, the words never came out the way I had planned. When the moment came, everything I had prepared seemed to evaporate into the air. The guilt was so overwhelming that it was hard to even breathe, let alone say what needed to be said. My hands trembled as I held the cards, my voice wavered when I spoke. The realization that I couldn't keep giving, that I had to draw a line, it weighed so heavily on me. But even more so was the realization that for the first time in years, I was finally putting myself first. I had spent so much of my life putting my children's needs ahead of my own, and now I was facing the uncomfortable truth that they would no longer be the center of my world. I could no longer afford to keep giving. Finally, I made the decision. I called a family meeting. I knew it was time. I spent the entire afternoon preparing. I made dinner, a simple meal of roast chicken and mashed potatoes, the kind of dinner I used to make when we were all together, when the house was full of life. I set the table with care, placing each dish with precision, just like I always did when we had family meals. The chairs were empty, but I set them anyway. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could go back to how they were. Maybe they would hear me out. Maybe they would understand. As the time approached for the meeting, I stood by the door, waiting for them to arrive. I was hoping for a calm, thoughtful discussion, a moment where we could talk honestly and openly. I envisioned it in my mind. A family coming together, understanding one another's perspectives, resolving conflicts, and moving forward with a new sense of mutual respect. But as soon as they started arriving, I realized how far we had drifted. The gap between us was so much wider than I had imagined. Daniel was the first to show up, as expected. He arrived on time, a little stiff, a little formal. It was as though he had already put up walls, as though he knew what was coming. Jennifer, on the other hand, was 40 minutes late. 40 minutes. I had set the table, prepared the meal, and waited, hoping she'd show up on time, hoping she'd make an effort. But instead, she walked in as if nothing was wrong, her face tired, her demeanor indifferent. I felt a pang in my chest, a sharp reminder of how things had changed. And then there was Michael. He didn't even bother to show up in person. He sent me a text, saying he couldn't make it, but that I could just tell him everything over the phone. That moment should have been a wake-up call for me, but at the time I brushed it off. I told myself that maybe he was busy, maybe he had something urgent to attend to. I told myself that it didn't matter, that they were all just caught up in their own lives, that it wasn't personal. But deep down, I knew that it was personal. They had stopped caring, they had stopped making the effort, and I was left standing there, feeling small, feeling like an afterthought. I had prepared my speech carefully, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to steady my nerves. I had imagined this moment for so long, rehearsing what I would say, how I would say it. But when I finally opened my mouth to speak, the words I had rehearsed disappeared. I could barely catch my breath. Instead of the speech I had written, the words that came out of my mouth were simple, raw, and unpolished. I can't keep giving you money. I'm sorry, but I just can't anymore. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of their surprise, their confusion, their disbelief. It was as if they couldn't comprehend what I had just said. They looked at me with blank expressions, like I had said something incomprehensible. They didn't say anything at first. Daniel, usually the calm one, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his gaze dropping to the table. Jennifer, who had been late, didn't even look me in the eye. Michael, who wasn't even there, still sent a message. "What do you mean you can't?" he asked. His voice crackled through the speaker, distant and accusatory. I repeated myself, my voice trembling now. "I can't keep doing this. I've been helping you all for so long, but I can't afford to keep giving. I've been dipping into my savings and I'm running out of money. If I continue, I'll have nothing left for myself. I need to protect my future." The weight of my words hung in the air. The room felt suffocating. Daniel finally looked up, his expression unreadable. "Mom, you've always had enough. Dad left you comfortable. This house, your savings, you'll always have plenty." His words stung. They felt like a dismissal of everything Richard and I had worked for. They thought money was infinite, that it would never run out, that I would always be there to bail them out, to fix things for them. But I wasn't. I wasn't going to be their safety net anymore. I wasn't going to be their backup plan, their fallback. I was finally realizing that my life had been consumed by their needs, their expectations, and I had neglected my own future in the process. As the silence stretched on, I felt a sense of relief mixed with sorrow. Relief because I had finally spoken my truth, but sorrow because I knew what this meant. I knew that my relationship with my children, as it had been, was over. There was no going back. They had chosen to rely on me, to take from me, and now that I had nothing left to give, they didn't know how to respond. The meeting ended without resolution, without understanding, but I knew that I had done what I needed to do. I had finally taken control of my life. And as difficult as it was, I was ready to let go of the person I had been for them and start becoming the person I needed to be for myself. The silence that followed felt like a slap in the face. It wasn't just quiet, it was thick, suffocating, a weight that pressed down on me as I sat there, waiting for one of them to say something, anything. The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes, but no one spoke. Daniel's expression turned unreadable, his face hardening, his eyes narrowing as if he couldn't quite process what I had just said. His gaze moved from me to the table, as though searching for some kind of logical reason behind my words that he could dismiss. He couldn't understand. He didn't want to understand. Jennifer's face, on the other hand, went completely blank. I had seen that look before, when she was shutting down, when she didn't want to deal with something emotionally difficult. She looked at me like I was a stranger, like I wasn't the mother who had raised her, who had always been there for her. That blankness in her eyes made my heart ache. It was the absence of love, the absence of empathy, the exact opposite of what I had spent years trying to give her. Michael, still on speakerphone, didn't say anything at first. The silence stretched on longer than I expected. It was as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing, like he was waiting for me to say something else, something that would make sense of what I had just declared. Finally, I could hear the shock in his voice when he spoke.
At first, their actions
"What do you
seemed
mean you
helpful.
can't?"
Daniel
he asked,
suggested I
his tone
downsize,
laced
saying
with
the house was
disbelief.
too much for me to
"You've
manage
always
alone.
been there for us. You've always helped. Why can't you
Over
just
the
keep
course
helping?"
of 4 years, I calculated how
Jennifer's
much I had
voice
given
had
them.
an edge to
Nearly
it when she cut in. It was
$300,000.
sharp,
I can't keep
cold,
giving you money.
accusatory. "This is ridiculous,
I'm
Mom.
sorry, but I just
Why are you
can't
doing this now?
anymore.
What's the real reason?
I
Are you
can't
just
keep
tired
doing
of us
this. I've been
asking?
dipping into
Or
my
is there something
savings.
else going on?"
Look at these numbers.
I felt my voice
I
tremble
need to
as I
protect
repeated
my own
myself,
future.
the words catching in my throat. I had
The
never
decision
said
was made.
anything like this before.
I was going to
Not
sell
to
the
them,
house and
not to my
disappear from my
children.
children's lives for
I
good.
can't keep doing this. I've been dipping into my
They
savings
lost
for
me when they
years.
choose money
I've been
over
helping you
family.
all without question.
And me?
But if I continue like this,
I found freedom
I'll have
in the
nothing
only-
left for myself. Nothing. I'll be broke. The words felt foreign coming out of my mouth, as if they were meant for someone else, not me. But there it was, the cold, hard truth. The reality I had been trying to avoid. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his face settling into a look of irritation. He crossed his arms, a defensive gesture, and looked at me like I was overreacting. His voice came out flat, dismissive. "Mom, you have plenty of money. Dad left you comfortable. You live in a house worth nearly $1 million. You're being dramatic." His words stung, more than I could have imagined, the way he said comfortable, like I was living some kind of luxury, like money was an endless well that never ran dry. It was as if he didn't understand, didn't care to understand. He didn't see the years of financial strain, the anxiety, the sleepless nights I had spent worrying about how much I could give and how much I could keep for myself. He didn't see the growing pile of bills, the rising costs of living, the fact that I was quickly depleting the very savings that Richard and I had worked our whole lives to accumulate. I wasn't being dramatic, but how could I make him understand? How could I make them see? I pulled out the financial projections that Thomas, my advisor, had shown me a few weeks ago. He had laid them out so clearly. Figures, charts, the inevitable conclusion. I'd been avoiding them for as long as I could, but now I had no choice but to face them. I looked at Daniel and Jennifer, hoping they would understand the seriousness of what I was saying. "Look at these numbers," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, even though inside I was shaking. "These are the projections Thomas gave me. If I keep going at this rate, I'll be out of money in 6 years. That's it. At 74, I'll have nothing left. I've been supporting all of you for years, and I can't afford to keep doing it. I need to protect my own future. I need to think about myself for once." There was a pause. Daniel's expression flickered, his eyes darting to the papers in my hand before quickly shifting away, almost as if he couldn't bring himself to look at the harsh reality. Jennifer's face softened for a moment, but the coldness didn't fully disappear. She opened her mouth to say something, but the words never came. Instead, there was only silence, heavy and awkward. It felt like the room had shifted somehow. The foundation of everything I had believed about my relationship with them was crumbling. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I had raised them, loved them, supported them through everything. And now, in my time of need, I was asking for something in return, and it seemed like they couldn't give it to me. Not even understanding, not even empathy. As the silence stretched on, I felt an unfamiliar sense of anger start to rise in me, anger at myself for not doing this sooner, for allowing them to take so much for so long, anger at them for assuming that I would always be there, that I would always be the one to step in and fix things, and yet, the anger felt like a sharp blade that cut deeper into my heart, because all I had ever wanted was to be loved and appreciated, not as a source of financial support, but as a mother, as someone who had given everything out of love. But now, as I looked at their faces, it was hard to see love there. I looked at my children, who had been my entire world, and for the first time, I felt like they were strangers. The mother I had been to them no longer seemed to matter. They no longer saw me as a person. They saw me as a tool to fix their problems, to alleviate their burdens. And as much as I wanted to hold on to the love I once had with them, I knew that it had changed. They had taken so much from me, and I had given it willingly, thinking that it would make them love me more, respect me more. But in the end, they had become entitled to it. They had come to expect it. I exhaled, looking at the three of them, hoping that they would understand the magnitude of what I was saying. I couldn't give any more, and I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. I was done. But somehow, saying it out loud didn't make me feel better. It didn't make it easier. It was just done. The decision was made. I had to sell the house. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I was going to sell it and disappear from my children's lives for good. It felt strange, like I was making a choice that should have been unthinkable, but it also felt strangely freeing. I didn't need their approval anymore, and I certainly didn't want their interference. For years, I had put their needs, their expectations, ahead of my own. I had lived in this house, surrounded by their demands, surrounded by the constant reminder of how little I meant to them when the money ran out. Every corner of this place held a memory, a moment I had sacrificed for them, a moment I had given, only for it to be taken for granted. I could no longer bear it. It was time to let go of the past. It was time to step away, to start a new chapter, one where I lived for myself, where I was no longer someone's fallback plan or safety net. The thought of it was liberating. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had been holding on to the idea of what I thought family should be. I had imagined that they would care for me as I had cared for them, but they had shown me the truth. They had stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as a resource, and now I had to free myself from that. I didn't want to live in a place that constantly reminded me of everything I had lost, everything I had given up, all while receiving nothing in return. It was time to walk away, to reclaim the life that had been mine before their demands took over. I met with Thomas, my financial advisor, the very next day. The meeting was calm, almost therapeutic, as if I had already made peace with my decision and was simply finalizing the details. We laid out all my financial documents on his office table, every bank statement, every receipt, every piece of paper that documented my life's work. I had saved every penny, every dollar Richard and I had worked so hard to earn. Those papers weren't just numbers, they were years of sacrifice, years of struggle and planning, a testament to everything we had done to create a future. I explained my decision to Thomas with unwavering confidence. I didn't hesitate. I didn't second-guess myself. For the first time in a long while, I felt completely sure of my choice. This was what I needed. This was the only way forward. Thomas didn't try to talk me out of it, didn't try to offer any alternatives. He knew this was the right move for me. He had seen how I had struggled, how my finances had been slipping away, how my emotional well-being had taken a hit every time I gave in to their demands. He knew that this wasn't just about money. It was about me reclaiming my life, my peace, my dignity. We listed the house 2 weeks later. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief as the "for sale" sign went up in front of the house I had lived in for so many years. It was the place where my children grew up, where we celebrated holidays and birthdays, where we had laughed and cried and dreamed of a future. But now, it was just a house, a place that no longer served me. Within 3 days of listing, we had multiple offers. The market was hot, and the house was in demand. It felt almost surreal, like the universe was aligning to help me move forward, to help me shed the weight of my past. The closing happened quickly, with no drama, no emotional outbursts. I signed the papers, handed over the keys, and walked away from the house with a check for $862,000. I remember holding that check in my hand, feeling the weight of it, not because of the money, but because it symbolized the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It was more than enough to start over. It was my ticket to a new life, a life where I could finally breathe, a life where I wasn't suffocated by guilt or obligation, a life where I could live for myself, not for anyone else. I chose Asheville, North Carolina, a place far from the life I once knew, a place where no one knew me, where no one expected anything from me. I wanted to start fresh, to live in a place that felt like a blank canvas. No more history, no more obligations, just me, my freedom, and the opportunity to rebuild. I found a small house in the mountains, nestled in a quiet neighborhood where people smiled and waved, but didn't ask for anything. The air was cleaner, the pace slower. For the first time in years, I felt like I could hear myself think. I could wake up in the morning and not feel the weight of everyone else's needs pressing down on me. As I settled into my new life, I knew I had made the right choice. My children would have their inheritance, whatever was left after everything I had given them over the years. But I had something far more valuable than money. I had my freedom. I wasn't anyone's ATM anymore. I wasn't anyone's emotional punching bag. I was finally living for myself. I had taken the power back. No more guilt, no more resentment, just peace. The peace that comes with knowing that, for the first time in a long time, I was doing what was best for me. And as I sat on the porch of my new home, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Contentment. I didn't need their approval, their validation, or their love, at least not in the way I had been seeking it all these years. I had finally learned to love myself, to take care of myself. The future was uncertain, yes, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face it, to live it on my own terms. Would I have preferred a different path? A life where my children treated me with love and respect, without expecting money in return? Of course. But they made their choices. And I made mine. They lost me when they chose money over family. And me? I found freedom in the only way I knew how, by walking away.